Hi, my name is Scott. I'm not an expert on theology, environmental justice, or fat studies. I'm just a Master's of Divinity student in North Carolina. I'm going to be speaking from a Christian perspective. That will be my frame of reference, and hopefully, will be useful whether or not you share that frame of reference. And it's possible that it won't be, even if you do share frame of reference, because I, for example, might be really wrong about things. But thanks for listening anyway. So I got interested in food justice because there's a lot of free food and I love food. And it also resonated with me. This is a movement that cares deeply about the environment. For me, as a person with faith, I was attracted to places where environmental justice and faith got together because these places made my faith feel real, and it was also fun to get to do something about environmental justice. Now, there's a long history of Christian environmental reflection and theological reflection on food, land, and agrarian issues. Indeed, the context of the Hebrew Bible and later the New Testament was very much agrarian. It is only until relatively recently that many people would be city dwellers and not fluent in that context of the agrarian farming, close to the land sort of life. Now, food justice as a movement became popular in the early 2000s. It grew and got a name, and this is probably because of things like concerns about climate change, corn subsidies, factory farms, and the obesity epidemic, as well as writers like Michael Pollan, who influenced me a lot, writing books like In Defense of Food and Omnivore's Dilemma. This influenced agrarian-minded theologians, and it also made their work more popular for seminaries, and that sort of influenced my decision to go to the seminary that I am going to. These food justice movements can make mistakes. I've been deeply influenced by Julie Guthman's work on a variety of levels, and I agree with her when she says that she agrees with Michael Pollan on most things. I also agree with him on a lot of things, but there's missing the mark on a lot of things, and that includes the way that we talk about fat people like me. Food justice has some flaws, probably because of the social location. It doesn't ordinarily focus on things like the Arab Spring, which is arguably very much a movement that was about a lot of things, including food justice, access to food, and scarcity. I'll edit that out. I want to work against certain attitudes, implicit and explicit, within food justice movements, literature, books, and just people I know, who I love, who I work with, that look at fat bodies like they're wrong, or a negative externality caused by the injustice of our dysfunctional food system. It looks at fat bodies as flawed or diseased, or renders the existence of fat people themselves as a form of injustice. When we look at the obesity rate, whatever you want to call it, in African Americans or other minority groups, or in lower socioeconomic groups, it can be interpreted that the fact that they are a fatter group is some sort of injustice perpetuated onto that community. And while there are injustices perpetuated onto these communities because of these systems, I don't think that being fat is an injustice. I'm sure this is a fat studies conference, so I'm sure y'all kind of probably agree, right? So the injustice is probably bound up in the way that those bodies are treated. And similarly, this criticism is that fat voices don't always get a place. Ideas of justice and just food systems sometimes can even look like a world where there's no fat people. But, I don't know about that. Kind of think it's okay to be who you are. Jennifer Brady, Lee Potvin, and others point out that fat studies scholars have rightly called out the fat hatred that has been promulgated by food studies scholars and activists. Yet fat studies scholars have yet to bring their incisive analysis to bear on areas of import to food studies, such as the local economy of food systems, and food policies. And I'm curious what the adjacent and contiguous Christian agrarian theology can offer as well. Some of the flaws that I've seen in the works of authors I love, who are very formative to me in this field of Christian agrarian theology, could be looking at fat as just, the negative consequence of things, or finding ways of talking about obese people and a list of injustices. So it's not really doting or attentive to it. It just goes, oh yeah, and obesity, as if though, it's not cracking the nut of how we're pathologizing a whole type of group of people. Who I think Julie Guthrie puts really well when she said something along the lines of that we are relying on a standard average body to define justice, but we can't really impose a particular norm at this time because, you know, we're so infatuated with thinness, it might be unjust. We should care deeply about accommodating and embracing difference. And my hope is that Christian agrarian theology could be one of the roots for a holistic way of embracing fat and food together. Because it was actually this sort of theology that helped me get interested before I found fat studies in doing this at all. So, how could this work? Our desire to dominate the earth has led to a lot of these issues, and that our bodies are a part of the earth and can fall into that. So, Richard Bauckham writes that it's a fundamental misunderstanding to believe that dominion over the earth means domination of the earth. Dominion is very varying and broad, but the turn to look at that as domination is something that comes up in the early modern period. And I think that this is something that's happening with the way that we treat our bodies because we want to control the land, to subdue it, to pump in fertilizer in places where it wouldn't otherwise be something that could be done, to essentially terraform our own planet in order to grow crops and things like that. And that's not always doesn't always make sense. This is sort of similar to the way that diet culture makes us treat our own bodies. We're falling into the sense of self-control as if those self-control means that we subdue and dominate our own bodies. But in both senses, self-control, um, it comes from Galatians 5:22 as a Christian virtue, is more about a sense of mastery, and not as in the sense of a master slave dynamic, but a sense of self possession or temperance, a comfortability with oneself, to be in oneself. And domination, dominion over the earth, is connected to the fact that we're created in the image of God and that our dominion in the earth should match the way that God has dominion over us, which, in my opinion, is not to dominate and destroy, but to be a co worker who cares and tends and is shaping and is gets life out of the earth and gets joy out of the earth, not just telling it to what we want to do. And so diet culture is related to that. And we see that it is this way of looking at the Bible that is related to that. And even Sabrina Strings points out that some of my Protestant co-religionists have these ideas about diet culture, which are shaped the way that we treat bodies today and is linked to anti-Black racism. So we can undo that because we can understand through this Christian agrarian context that we are connected to land. Food is a gift, and eating is beautiful. The body comes from the earth as part of a seamless tapestry, and we are a part of it. We can't deny that we're not a part of it. Even when we're talking about health, individual health, as Wendell Berry points out, cannot ever be divorced from one's larger membership with the earth and its various communities. It is not useful to step out of the community that we were made, which is an ecological community. Reflecting on ecological diversity can very much remind us of the natural diversity, that there are different bodies, and that's okay. That's actually good. And the Christian point of view cares deeply about bodies, that bodies are good. And going back to Athanasius, we believe, or before Athanasius, going to Jesus, we believe that the body is good. We're not just trying to escape the body because the soul is everything and this is just the dumb flesh tube carpet. Body is good. It's okay to have a body, and it will be an imperfect body. We are imperfect, but it's not imperfect because we're fat. I'm flawed in so many ways. Being fat isn't one of them. Being fat's cool. What's up? Anyway, but it doesn't have to be cool. It could just be neutral. Let me read my script. We can want to control things because bodies are sites of pain, and they can make us feel vulnerable. This is a part inspired by my professor, Norman Morsbach. The moment we try to make bodies and places submit to our desire for what we... Actually, I think I'm quoting. Submit to our desire for what we want them to be, for how we want them to behave, we're going to discover that To do it effectively, we have to use violence because to come into the presence of creatures is to recognize that they have their own lives, they have their own modes of fulfillment that don't necessarily align with ours. That's what my professor said, and I agree with him. I'm just telling you all that now. That trying to make the land do something that it can't do is not sustainable. Just like diet culture doesn't necessarily, it really doesn't work for most people. Um, Celebrating bodies as not being wrong is good. It's the good thing. When we talk about the body being a temple, so often my fat Christian friends can be told, "Oh yeah, you're really not respecting your body by being fat." But actually, embracing the body as a temple means not trying to change it, but to see the image of God in it. Because the image of God is in our fat siblings, sisters, and brothers, right? And so we can learn this from ecology. We can learn this from farming. We can learn this from all sorts of things. Our bodies are limited, but we can work together. Farming is limited, but we can work together. We can take inspiration from nature to be reminded of the validity and dignity in diversity. And the reason diversity is the operative word now is because the majority of people in my country are fat, but it's seen as wrong. Like this diversity is somehow a problem. Now, there's a lot of probably a lot of health problems that come from our food system on so many levels. But if we're just looking at it as being fat being one of them, I don't think that's accurate because I'm into like that whole health is at any size thing. In conclusion, the natural is a construct that can be useful and abused. It's not just about that it's natural, that's why it's good. Because I love Sabrina String's book, uh, Fear of the Fear of the Black Body, where she traces the way that looking people were looking at different bodies and just assuming what they were into was what was right. Um, and so it isn't that we return to nature that helps us because return to nature can mean anything. One of the issues that we're facing as fat people and that my fat friends are facing is that the fat body is seen as not natural. When it, well, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It doesn't really matter because we exist and we deserve respect. Ah, and so it's more about looking at it as a reminder and taking refuge in that. Having a religious imagination that embraces the fact that someone is made in the body's made in God's image is really good for helping people have a better sense of self love and self acceptance. However, the belief that one's body is just something I live in here on earth, sinful and meant to be subdued, or less important than one's soul, is linked to body shame. And that is from a study done by Biola University. My point in bringing that up is to say it's not just that it's religion or that the proper exegesis of Genesis 1:28 is what's good. It's rather that we need to look at these things that exist outside of us with a fat liberationist mindset. I mean, I would love to say that it is through my relationship with Jesus and my relationship with the land and farming that's made all the difference for me accepting myself as who I am. So it's not just that we're looking at scripture, tradition, experience, and reason as a testament to why creation care and body love, body acceptance, body dignity matters. It's rather that we could just look at it through a fat liberationist lens and read the Bible through those eyes. Because a lot of fat people are made to read the Bible through eyes that are saying, well, fat people, what is this, gluttony? Oh. Instead of, the fact that food is beautiful, food is wonderful, and food is pleasurable, and bodies are beautiful, and bodies are big, and bodies are pleasurable. And I'll say that food and fat don't necessarily have to be connected. It's wrong to assume that food studies is the one who is calling out the fat studies to respond by bringing up our bodies. Fat studies is talking about everything. It's not like food. I mean, I eat a lot because I love food, but I'm sure you know a lot of fat people who have all different types of ways of eating. It's not like fat people are fat because they eat too much. Uh, there are a lot of people who might eat too much. It's like you're too fat. Too fat compared to what? Eating too much. Too much compared to what? Gluttony is more of an issue about eating in a way that makes nobody else able to eat. There's nothing inherent about fat studies that should be necessarily connected to food because it's just playing in this notion that fat people are fat because of irresponsible choices with food, when in fact we're associating food with fat unnecessarily, as if though bodies aren't making their own choices or it's only in a calories in, calories out framework. So I don't want to add in the notion that being fat is all about because you ate too much, because there's a lot of reasons people are fat, and maybe eating too much is one of them. That's cool. No, fat bodies are good. Fat bodies are creating the image of God. Fat is good. It's good. It's a good thing. It's not a consolation prize, and it's not necessarily because you ate too much. Identifying food eating patterns and fatness is not ideal. However, we get overly stigmatized because of eating because people are associating with it, and we should take pleasure in food because it's a good thing and it's beautiful and it's a gift. Thanks.